Giving feedback is always an important responsibility of any leader. And in this episode, I'm going to show you how to give feedback in 4 simple steps. Welcome to Business Leaders Coach, where we educate, enable, equip, and empower you to become the best leader that you can be. My name is Toya Oshimbi, founder of Business Leaders Coach. And at Business Leaders Coach, we work with CEOs and their leadership teams, companies that are scaling up and want to accelerate their learning. On this podcast, I bring you practical steps that you can apply in your leadership today. We draw wisdom from some of the best business books, bring on guests and entrepreneurs and authors as well. You can go to businessleaderscoach.com/podcast, subscribe so that we can send each episode and any templates or tools that come with these subsequent episodes. Now, one of the challenges leaders face when it comes to helping their people to develop and grow is having that ability to give feedback. Now, this is usually one of the areas where I find many people find it challenging either to give and sometimes to even receive. But more important, how to give this feedback. Many times people will come to me and say, how do I do this? Especially when it's what we might call constructive feedback or negative feedback. So in this episode, I want to give you 4 simple steps on how to give feedback. And so you might be listening to this as you're driving. At some point, you might want to just listen to this again, just to take some notes, because it is a framework that you would find easy to remember. Now, I've had different models and trained different ways of how to give feedback, and I found that this is the one that tends to stick the most, because what you're going to find is it's more about you being a good observer of things, and so it would lend towards you being able to apply this even today if you need to. But before that, we have to understand why giving feedback is really so important. What you will find is that what we might say is that there is no company that doesn't grow without having good feedback. Okay. And if a company or team is not growing, then typically one of the problems definitely is that they're not giving feedback. They're not getting the right feedback in order to apply. Now, feedback comes in many ways. The data that we receive on whether it's our sales or revenues or all these NPS scores, that's part of feedback as well. But what we're also looking at is more of the interactions between individuals, and as a leader with direct reports, one of your responsibilities is to be able to give feedback in a way that can help the individual. And so in these 4 steps that I'm going to give you, it will give you the practical skills of knowing exactly what to say, how to say it, and how to get the end result, which is that you want the person to take that feedback on board. So first, let's start with the very important question. What is feedback? So I've looked at different definitions, and I always love this definition that I'm going to read out right now because it does give a good end goal. So feedback is information or opinion that one gives to someone on their performance, on the execution of a task, on their behavior, or on an outcome, with the purpose of developing them. Now, typically when I ask people when I'm training or coaching about what stands out from that definition, 9 times out of 10, people will hone in on that last part of the statement, which says with the purpose of developing them. And the reason why I think that people gravitate to that statement is because people receive feedback, but not all the time is it coming with that intent of developing the person. And I think it's something that every leader should have that in mind, is that, is this going to help this person get better? What I'm about to say, is it going to help them get better, or is it just information? And so how we then say and give this feedback is absolutely important, because you really want that person to know exactly what it is to change or what it is to continue doing. And if it's not said in the right way, then obviously this person won't see it as it's for the purpose of developing them. The second thing is also, why is feedback important? Well, definitely there are a number of reasons. One of the reasons is, as I said earlier on, an organization will not grow if it's not receiving feedback, and individuals would not grow. They won't grow without good feedback. Feedback is part of how we grow. When you think about a child learning how to walk, getting up, falling down, getting up, falling down, taking 2 steps, 3 steps, that's feedback. Feedback is where you're able to look at what you've done, assess, and then maybe go back in again and tweak a few things. So this whole journey that we are on, when you think about even the organizations that are building apps these days, you find that there's 1.0 version, there's 2.0 version. They'll ask you a few questions because it's an iteration. And we are now living in that kind of world where we've come to understand that what's called the feedback loop is part of what helps us to progress. And so it needs to be applied to individuals. So if you are a leader of a team, you want to start figuring out how you can start giving each other feedback. And that's what I want to pass on to you today. Now, if I was to go a bit further, something that I actually wasn't planning on saying, but before we can even give constructive feedback, you need to have clear goals and clear expectation. And maybe down the line, I will record another podcast on setting clear goals and expectations, because that has to be the first thing in place, that there's a clear expectation of what's expected of me, what are the behaviors that I'm called to demonstrate. Then feedback also becomes more meaningful, especially if I was already given some kind of guidelines of what's expected of me. Another area why feedback is so important is because that's one of the reasons why employees are disengaged when there's not enough feedback. They don't know whether they're doing well or not. And over time, they tend to just lose sight of what's really important. One of the reasons why people hate end of year performance reviews, what you'll find, if that's the case in the culture of an organization, typically it's because that's where the manager decides to give feedback. Now, I've heard many stories, some of them really bad, stories of employees not getting promoted, and they only found out in the end of year review, or employees have found out about something that they did 3 months, let's say it's December, something that an employee did in September gets brought up in the end of year performance review. And wherever I go, I always say there should be no surprises in any kind of end of year performance review. But the reason why that happens is because feedback is not part of the culture. The best time to give feedback is almost immediately. We'll talk about that. But there is a way and a timeline of when to give the right feedback for the benefit of that person, not 6 months or so later. So when we give feedback to somebody, there are a few things that need to be in place. Okay. So the whole idea of giving feedback is that, based on our definition, is for the purpose of developing this individual. And what that then means is that the feedback can either be positive, some would use the term positive reinforcement. And with that, what we are doing is that we are highlighting behaviors that they are demonstrating that we want them to continue to take it to that next level. So that's where we are catching people doing what is right. And then the other side of that, I use the term constructive. Some people use the term corrective. Some people use the term negative. I think constructive or corrective is fine. And it's simply to realign the person to the behavior that we want to see. Both are important. Statistics show when researchers have observed a thriving culture, what they have observed typically is that the ratio between positive to constructive is about 6-1 or 5-1. Now, what that means is that a healthy culture is usually giving 5 or 6 positive reinforcements to 1 constructive. And what that means is that in that kind of culture, managers and leaders and everybody has been trained to catch people doing what is right, but also verbalizing it, giving it as positive feedback. And that's what I would want you to take away from today when I give you this framework, is to not only catch people doing what's wrong or use it as a correcting stick, but it should also be to highlight when people are doing the right things, because what we find is that when people are positively reinforced, they do it again. They repeat that behavior because it's rewarding. Okay, so let me give you the 4 steps. Now, first and foremost, all the feedback should be based on trends, especially when it's constructive. So some of the examples I'm going to give, don't just take it as it's a one-time thing. Sometimes if it's constructive in particular, you want to make sure that you're seeing what's called a trend of this behavior. Now, before I get into this, I need to define what I mean by behavior. So we're going to use this definition of how we define behavior. We're simply going to say behavior is anything we see people do or what we hear them say. What we see people do or hear them say. So it has to either be what we're observing from their body language, or where they go, or how their mannerisms. It could be that aspect, or it could be exactly what they said, the tone they said it in, things like that. So it's really important that we take that aspect of behavior because it's at the level of what we can see. And the reason why I want to just quickly put that in your mind is because sometimes people have come to me, or I've seen this, I've observed this, and before I even learned this, I realized that people would call somebody aside and say, Claire, I want to give you some feedback. I just find you difficult to work with. You're just a difficult person. And it's almost like, wow, where does Claire go to when she hears that kind of feedback? You are a difficult person. That's not good at all. So we're going to try and avoid that kind of feedback and give you more of a constructive way, where when someone like Claire hears that kind of the right kind of feedback, you find that she's able to do something with it. Okay, so first step is what I call position. So we need to position the conversation. Now, what I mean by positioning is that we need to be very much aware of when to give the feedback. Okay, the best time to give feedback is almost immediately, but you have to be more aware of the person that you're giving the feedback to. Is this the right time to give it to them? Maybe they're very angry and they're quite emotional. Perhaps that's not the time to give this feedback, right? So perhaps you need to position it in the right way so that this person can take it on board. If it is constructive feedback and there are people around, well, again, perhaps that's not the right place to give that feedback. Maybe we need to position the environment, maybe going into a room or somewhere where it could be just you and this person, so that there's no distractions and this person doesn't feel embarrassed about it. Positioning can also be what you say before you actually give the feedback. You can set it up so that this person is aware that, is it okay for us to have a conversation about what I've just observed? Is it okay for us to have a conversation about the meeting that we've just come out from? Now, one of the things that you notice in what I've said is I have not used the word feedback. In Your Brain at Work by David Rock, he specifically says that based on the research, that what they found was that whenever people use that term, can I give you some feedback, that it literally did something to the brain where the person shut down or clenched up or just became more defensive, because it's almost like, what are you about to say? And so I will encourage you to refrain from saying, I want to give you some feedback. And it doesn't matter, even if it's positive or negative or constructive, just let's try and eliminate that actual word feedback. But what you're trying to do, the reason why I mention of the positioning, is that you want to make sure this person knows that they're going into a conversation, right? And it's about a specific event or time or something like that. So that's the positioning on it. Now, if you know that maybe it's going to be tough and that it actually could end up getting quite emotional, you can still position it and let them know that I would like us to talk about this, and just to stay focused on what it is, so that we don't go off track. Are you okay with that? Something like that might just guide the conversation. But you can do it even if it's a positive feedback that you're trying to give, because if you're doing it that way, then you're not also setting things up that, oh, whenever I say, can we have this conversation, then I know that you're going down the constructive or negative route. So you maybe just as a pattern of behavior, you might also always want to position it so that the person isn't so much aware of whether you're going down a positive or negative route. Many people are aware of what's called the sandwich approach, and that's definitely not what I am encouraging here, where you say something to fluff the person up and then you go down the negative and then you end it out with a positive. That has proved to not work, because people say, why don't you just cut to the chase and tell me what you really want to say, rather than packaging it with a positive at both ends. So it doesn't work, and I'm not encouraging that at all. So we've positioned the conversation, right? So it's either we're in a room with the person, or at least we've got the person's attention, that we want to bring something to their awareness. And that's P. So that's the first step. Then the second step is now the action. And now here's where we're going to use our definition of behavior to our advantage. Remember, I said that behavior is what we hear people say and what we see them do. And so what you want to do is you specifically want to pinpoint the behavior you saw. Okay, so let's say, and we want to encourage more positive. Remember, I said 5 to 1, 6 to 1. So let's say Mary is my direct report, and what I have observed is we've just got some new team members in the office, and I've noticed that Mary actually takes time to sit down with these new team members and explain things in more detail about how things are working. And I've noticed this a number of times. So I can call Mary and say, hey, Mary, I just want to talk to you about a few things that I've noticed over the last few weeks. When I come in, what I notice is I see you sitting down with Bob and with this person and with this person, and really going into details, explaining things about how things work here. Now, what I have just done there is I have pinpointed the behavior. Interestingly enough, I was training a group 2 months ago, and one person said to me, you know what, Tuye, sometimes I actually even find it hard to give positive feedback. And I said, why is that? And he said, well, it's because all I can say is you're doing a great job. And then I said, what about receiving positive feedback? And he said, yeah, same thing as well. And I've actually asked quite a number of people who said, oh, I don't like positive feedback. And I said, when I asked them why, typically they will say it's because all they can say is that you're doing a great job. Now, what I want to highlight here by using this example is that the reason why people get fed up of sometimes hearing what we might even say is positive is because there's no meaning to it. What do you mean by you're doing a great job? What I have just given you with the example with Mary is we've pinpointed behavior. Did you notice when I've observed you sitting with the team members, describing things that are going on, explaining in detail? That's something that she can become aware that that's something that I've actually done. And so when you're giving positive feedback or whatever feedback, when we're honing in on the actions, we want to describe it to the best of our ability, right? We want to even quote sometimes what they've said, and I'll come back to that. But let's just continue with this example with Mary. So what I have done so far is I've noticed this behavior. And so one of the ways of engaging, Mary in this feedback conversation, and what you've got to see is that the best way to give this feedback is when there's a bit of a yin and a yang, which is that it is conversational. And so you want to throw a question to say, well, what do you think? Have you noticed this about what you've been doing? So you really want to just sort of pass it on to say, hey, here's what I've noticed. Are you aware that that's what you've been doing? And it's just a good way of engaging the person in the thinking process so that they are aware of what they've been doing. Okay, so that's a positive one. And remember, that's what we want to encourage. So you want to, even today, as you're listening to this, or tomorrow, go in the office, observe people doing things that are right. Now, other things sometimes that I hear will be, well, they're just doing their job. Well, you got it wrong. They're doing their job. And remember, positive reinforcement encourages them to keep doing their job, because by you reinforcing it, you will see more of it. But let's go down another route of a constructive feedback. So let's say that I've noticed a trend, and especially when it comes to constructive feedback, we want to make sure that it's not just a one-off. Now, if it was a one-off, something that is definitely going to be disastrous, we absolutely we step in. But if it is a one-off thing that is kind of trivial, is this the person's pattern? We don't want to give the feedback immediately. But let's say I've seen it now 2 or 3 times, and here's how I can go about it. So I'm going to give John some feedback, and here's what I've observed. So it's at the end of the meeting, and I say, oh, John, can we just have a bit of chat about the meeting that we've just come out from? Yeah. And I say, well, I just want to mention something that I've noticed, and it's happened at least 3 times. Every time Julie's talking, what I've observed is that halfway through, when she's just talking about something, you've come in and sort of cut her off. That's what I've observed. You see there? I've pinpointed a behavior. I've pinpointed a trend. Now, here's what I'm going to do. And this is the phrase that you can always guarantee makes it conversational. Would you say that that's a fair assessment, John? Would you say that's a fair assessment? Now, well, we don't know what John's going to say. He might say, well, I'm not aware, whatever it is. But what you've done there is you've pinpointed the behavior. Remember, I talked about Claire, and I said, Claire, you're just so difficult to work with. Can you see that Claire doesn't know what behavior is making her being difficult to work with? If perhaps it was an area of, well, whenever I try to pass things on to you, I've noticed that you just turn away, or whatever it is. If we're able to pinpoint the behavior, then Claire can say, oh, wow, okay, that's something that I'm not aware of, or that's something that I can definitely handle. I can deal with that. Okay. So we always want to pinpoint the behavior. Okay. So just think of different examples. Observation is always going to be your best friend. So let's go back to Mary, who's helping out with these individuals in the team. The next step is impact. So we want to help this person to understand the impact that this behavior is having. Obviously, this is a positive one. So I can simply say, and here's what I've noticed. I've seen the new team members really excited, buzzing around. In fact, it could be that I've asked them a few questions and they're just loving the time that you're spending with them. Whatever it is, they're engaged, they're enthusiastic. That's the impact it's having on the team. If it was something, for instance, that had to do with me, even I can then say, and the impact it's having on me is I'm just so encouraged that somebody's using their own initiative to spend time with these people. That's the impact it's having on me. Okay, so this is all positive, right? Some of you want to get to the more constructive one. So let's talk about John. who we observed in the meeting cutting off Julie while she's talking, I can then perhaps say, now the impact I've observed, and remember I've asked John if this is a fair assessment. So perhaps he is aware, but let's make this a bit more difficult. Let's say he's not aware at the moment, okay? And then it could simply be, well, maybe you're not aware, but here's what I've also observed. After that kind of behavior, the impact it's having on Julie is I've noticed that she's not contributing in these meetings as at the beginning. That's my own observation. Or I can then say the impact it's having on the rest of the people is that everybody else goes silent. You get my point? Like, or the impact it's having on me is X and Y and Z. So you're simply just describing the impact that behavior is having. The impact it's having on the customers is X, Y, and Z, right? So it's something to the reason why you're bringing to this person's awareness the distinction between the behavior and the impact. And that's the essence of giving this feedback, is that it describes the behavior and then it describes the impact that behavior is having. And the reason why this is important is because everybody is in control of their own behavior. Typically what happens is we tend to just go down the impact. You get my point? Like we will say, every time you come into the room, everything just goes dull. Nobody talks. It's like, well, what did I do? And so that's what you want to hone in first on, the behavior, and that's the action, and then the impact. And can you see that by breaking it with that question, is this a fair assessment? You're giving that person the opportunity to actually even reflect and think, yeah, is that my behavior? And the reason why I train it this way is because when you do it that way, which is that you allow the person to reflect on their behavior, by the time you get to the impact, they will realize that, okay, at least this is something that I can be in control of. And then the last step is then do. Now, it could be do or it could be don't, right? It's D. If it is a positive behavior with Mary and the team members, keep on doing it. It's as simple as that. You don't really need to say more. If it is something that you want to eliminate, there's a way of how you can still make it conversational. If John has now accepted that, wow, actually, I'm not aware, we can simply say, well, how can we eliminate this? Or how can we reduce this behavior? Or how can we, what can you do? What can you do to stop this? What can you do to eliminate this? What can you do? How can we work on this? These are different ways of how you bring this about. Sometimes some people come to me and say, I need to manage upwards. Same process. Here's what I've observed. This is the impact it's having on me. What can we do when this happens next time? And if it's a good manager, a good leader, that manager or leader should say, oh, wow, I wasn't aware of that. But when it happens, sometimes the two of you might be able to come up with a trigger, a slogan or something that is said to remind the leader that, oh, you're behaving this way. These are ways of how you can actually agree on moving forward. Okay. So I hope that this short sort of mini, almost like a training podcast, has helped. Please email me, toya@businessleaderscoach.com. If you have any further questions around this, or if you have any other area that you want me to break down something like this, something very practical. So what are the 4 steps? The 4 steps are, first of all, number 1, positioning, always making sure that it's at the right time in the right place where you are giving the feedback. And it doesn't matter if it's positive or constructive, still try and make that the pattern where you're positioning things in the right way. The second is action, making sure that you're honing in just on the behavior. You're talking about what the person said or what you saw them do. Right. And so if it was observing your salespeople, maybe you want to observe the questions that they were asking and then the impact it had. Yeah. And if you're saying that, well, there are more difficult situations that I face, typical ones that come up will be, somebody comes into the office with body odor. Somebody has a big challenging situation in their life, and yet they're not delivering results on their performance. All these tricky ones. Look, it's the same thing. Yeah, it will be the same thing. Here's what I have observed. Is this a fair assessment? Are you aware? Even if it's the body odor. I know it might be tricky to say this, and obviously the positioning of that will have to be right. And in some situations, you might get the right person to give this feedback. So if you're a male person and you have a female team member, perhaps you might not be the right person to give this. And in some cases, you are. I mean, I've had that actually. And if it's done in the right way, remember, everything is done with the intent to benefit the person. And what you'll find is that if feedback is given well, eventually that person will thank you, as long as they're in their right mind. So I hope this has helped. This is Toye from Business Leaders Coach. Today we've talked about how to give feedback, 4 simple steps. Go to businessleaderscoach.com/podcast if you haven't yet subscribed. And I look forward to speaking to you soon. Thank you.